Is there any discussion? None? So all approved by letting it be known by saying aye? Aye.
Aye.
Any disapprovals? All right, great. The second action item is approval of the compliance program. The program was sent to all board members. Everyone has had a chance to hopefully review it. We have Ms. Rika Calhoun with us today, the university's Chief Compliance and Ethics Officer, and she will present an overview of the report.
Good afternoon.
Do we need?
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this okay?
Yes,
great.
You're on.
So I will start with the overview. First, I'll give you a roadmap as an outline of what we'll be discussing today. I'll be answering some frequently asked questions that we've received. Why a compliance and ethics program, the difference between audit and compliance, the 7 elements of an effective compliance and ethics program, as well as progress that we've made so far. So why compliance and ethics? As you know, higher education is one of the most widely regulated industries, from federal to state law and numerous administrative enforcement agencies in between. There is an intense focus on so many aspects of our operation. It is important to have a concentrated view of compliance and ethics issues through a formalized process that a program can provide. Then we look at our very structure. Our institution, like many others, has a decentralized structure, which means that each compliance area has subject matter experts. This is a benefit as those subject matter experts are highly knowledgeable and can closely monitor their area. The disadvantage is that these areas tend to work in silos, which can result in compliance gaps and a sometimes fragmented response, especially in response to issues that span multiple departments and compliance and ethics issues. An effective compliance and ethics program helps us bridge those gaps by working with compliance partners throughout the institution to identify those issues and assist in the development of a comprehensive institutional response. There's also a cost savings in effectively monitoring compliance and ethics issues in comparison to the serious costs associated with defending allegations of wrongdoing or payment in the form of settlement or ordered remedy. This does not include the cost of corrective action or the negative impact to the institution's reputation. For example, in the last few years, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has filed multiple complaints against universities for a number of alleged violations, including sex discrimination, disability discrimination, and retaliation. A compliance and ethics program allows us to be proactive through monitoring, response, and working proactively to prevent us from lapsing back into noncompliance. As importantly is university culture. The compliance and ethics program promotes a culture of compliance and ethical decision-making by making it a priority, giving members of the university community the tools that they need to adhere to clear expectations and to report. A question that I get with some frequency is, what is the difference between audit and compliance? There is some overlap, but important distinction. Internal audit is focused on providing assurance or validation by periodically testing internal controls established by management to determine effectiveness. Compliance focuses on working continually with compliance elements throughout the university to comply with applicable law and policy, while promoting a culture that empowers members of the university community to consistently engage in compliance and ethical decision-making. So where audit tests the decisions that management has made, compliance works with management on ways to achieve compliance with requisite law and policy and maintain compliance. So the program plan. Our focus on compliance is outlined in our university strategic plan. We are priority 5, goal number 3. But in addition to that, the basis of the program plan follows the expectation established by the Board of Governors and the United States Sentencing Commission, which is comprised of 7 elements that have been incorporated into this plan. Sorry. Thank you. I will be expounding on each of these elements throughout the presentation. So they range from as simple as the standards and procedures that govern the program to incentives and disciplinary measures. The first element is standards and procedures. Standards and procedures that govern our compliance and ethics program are the University Code of Conduct, the Code of Ethics for Public Officers and Employees, and the University Compliance and Ethics Charter. These documents operate to establish a baseline expectation for behavior and the implementation of the compliance end. Next is oversight and structure. Oversight and commitment from the top down plays a large role in the implementation of an effective compliance and ethics program. It is important that our institution is structured in such a way to support and promote the program from the leadership down throughout the organization. We have that through the oversight provided by the Board of Trustees and the Audit and Compliance Committee. We also have highly effective, high-level personnel. The President and his executive leadership team, which includes myself, Vice Presidents, Directors, and faculty representation from essential areas and constituencies. These leaders work with me in the enforcement of the program and accountability for their particular area. Compliance partners, as I noted, are the subject matter experts in their departments. They are invaluable in the process of supporting and promoting the program, compliance, and ethical decision-making in their areas. Their input and work in the Enterprise Compliance Committee will allow us to address gaps in compliance and provide a comprehensive response to compliance issues that span multiple areas or present a high risk to the institution. Then to faculty, staff, and students. These constituencies are critical in supporting a culture in which this program can thrive. They are responsible for ultimately using the education and the resources that we provide to commit to compliance and ethical decision-making and report misconduct. The next element is appropriate screening. As I've noted, compliance and ethical decision-making are the responsibility of every member of the university community. It is much easier to promote a culture of compliance when individuals in positions of power are committed to the same. To that end, the BOG regulations require us to implement appropriate processes to ensure that individuals engaging in compliance or ethics misconduct are excluded from positions of substantial authority. To meet this expectation, I will be working with the Office of Human Resources to review the existing search process, which includes background checks and employment verification. And now on to communication and training. Educating members of the university community about compliance and ethics expectations is another key element in the effective ethics and compliance program. University constituency groups targeted for training are listed, ranging from the Board of Trustees, and you already received training, to our students. To accommodate different learning needs and capturing target groups, different modes of presentation will be developed. That is my project for the summer. The target date for full implementation of training will be fall of 2019. I will also accomplish additional outreach through programming and visibility. For example, I am working on a periodic newsletter which will consist of compliance updates from across the university, in addition to the outreach methods that are listed. Lunch and learns. Next is monitoring. Internal and external monitoring identifies what's working well and areas in which we can improve. Consistent monitoring is going to be crucial. Collaboration is the order of the day. Compliance partners monitor their areas through periodic risk assessments and operational assessments, immediately reporting ethical misconduct or compliance concerns to me through our dotted line reporting relationship. From my end, I will coordinate with compliance partners on concerns reported to the Division of Audit and Compliance or brought to my attention. I will conduct investigations and compliance reviews as necessary, reporting such findings to the department and executive compliance owner. I will also provide resources to compliance partners to collaborate in monitoring compliance throughout campus. Resources include compliance calendars for each department, compliance literature, and worksheets to assist compliance partners in evaluating their areas. I will conduct annual surveys of compliance partners to assess program progress. The results of those surveys will be included in my annual report to the board. And I've also begun sending you updates as to my progress for the Audit and Compliance Committee, and those will continue monthly.
Great.
I will also annually survey the university community to evaluate program effectiveness and university perceptions of compliance and ethics. And I've already submitted or posted one survey, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Most compliance issues span multiple departments and disciplines, I've mentioned. The Enterprise Compliance Committee will serve as an additional source of comprehensive monitoring. As compliance partners will be able to identify and monitor compliance concerns comprehensively. The committee will also assess policies and regulations to ensure that they are current and revised appropriately. We're also required to requisition an external review of the program within 5 years from the effective date of the regulation. BOG regulation became effective on November 3rd, 2016. So that places us at November 3rd, 2021. I would like to start the process a little earlier in 2020 to ensure that we have everything in place for 2021. Appropriate response and enforcement. A timely, consistent, and appropriate response is central to fostering trust and commitment to the program. I have begun collaborating with the Office of General Counsel to revise the University Code of Conduct. Suggested revisions of the Code of Conduct will underscore that all members of the university community have an explicit responsibility to adhere to compliance obligations and demonstrate ethical decision-making. Members also have a responsibility to report misconduct of which they become aware. Suggested revisions will also reinforce an established prohibition on retaliation. Reporting concerns is an important part of cultivating a university culture that understands the benefits that compliance and ethical decision-making has in their workplace every day, from their interactions with their colleagues to their own personal safety. There are many ways to report concerns, including the Compliance and Ethics Hotline, or webpage complaint portal, and complaints made in person. Reportable areas include anything from discrimination to research misconduct. Incentives and disciplinary measures. Clear expectations of behavior and accountability at all levels is essential for workplace morale and risk mitigation. The program plan calls for the application of a combination of incentives and disciplinary measures through the performance evaluation process and internal rewards. For example, I have collaborated with the Office of Human Resources to develop language that will be included in performance evaluations related specifically to compliance and ethics. The Enterprise Compliance Committee has also discussed a framework for recognizing employees who go above and beyond in specific areas of compliance and ethics across the university. We have an existing model through the Safety Committee, who recently awarded 3 safety recognition awards for individuals contributing to safety across levels on campus. Appropriate high-level personnel enforce accountability within their divisions by responding to findings and coordinating with the appropriate administrative office to implement appropriate disciplinary action. High-level personnel will also collaborate as necessary to employ best practices and explore the implementation of policies and procedures that benefit their division. I will assess institutional progress by following up with each division and employment function to document the progress and resolution of those compliance and ethics issues that occur. So we talked mostly about framework, gave a little bit of examples. So how are we putting it into practice? Since the beginning of my work here at the university, the last board meeting was my second day on the job, I have completed a number of action items toward the goal of implementing an effective compliance and ethics program. Within my first week, I had a meeting with Lori Clark and Joe Malachewski from the Board of Governors to discuss BOG expectations and provide resources. I participated in the quarterly Compliance and Ethics Officers Consortium, and I also had great opportunities to learn about the institution and make connections through the SAC's preparation and committee meetings. Some highlights. The Compliance and Ethics Program Plan that you have received has gone to many different stakeholders for review and feedback, including the Audit and Compliance Committee and the Board of Governors. I incorporated this valuable feedback into my drafts as appropriate toward the final product. The great thing about this program plan is that it's a living document. So as we know to do better, we'll do better. I sent out a survey to all employees which asked questions about compliance and ethics and aimed to get a baseline sense of the university's view of compliance and ethics on campus. The survey was open from April 3rd to April 30th. The response rate was not optimal, 7%. I'll improve on that, but I did get some great, thoughtful feedback from respondents. I plan to use the survey responses as well as information gained from my compliance partner meetings and informational events to help establish a baseline of issues that we will continually address. As discussed, I work with compliance partners throughout campus to provide a more comprehensive response to compliance issues. I have begun conducting individual meetings with each of the 28 identified compliance partners, meeting with 26 partners so far. These meetings have been invaluable. Not only did I get to meet wonderful colleagues committed to their areas of expertise, I observed a real desire to contribute to a culture of compliance and accountability, which is so very important. We have begun work on this effort through the Enterprise Compliance Committee, which serves as an institutional work group that allows compliance partners to be at the table at the same time to address compliance issues, share best practices, and identify risk areas for the institute. The work group is then broken up into subgroups that will focus on high-risk areas to provide consistent support and response. We will also coordinate with existing committees to ensure the best use of resources and time. So for example, the Safety Committee, Athletics Task Force, and the Clery Committee are all pre-existing committees that have a deep connection to particularly high-risk compliance areas. The Enterprise Compliance Committee has met and begun identifying high-risk areas and priorities for the university. Some of the areas that we are working through are traditional high-risk areas with issues impacting the institute, such as Title IX in athletics, data privacy. For example, one of the first issues that we have worked on was the institution's response to the implementation of the General Data Protection Regulation, otherwise known as GDPR. The regulation was passed by the European Union and gives those natural persons in the EU extended rights over the use of their data and the way that we process that data. This regulation could affect a number of areas and departments, from admissions and the registrar to procurement. We have met to discuss institutional exposure, and we have developed a privacy notice and guidelines which were posted on the website on May 5th with the help of university. So at FAMU, great things are happening every day, and it's definitely a privilege to be part of the team, and I will entertain any questions that you have.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Calhoun. Very comprehensive, and also for such a short period of time, you've accomplished a lot, and really appreciate that, and the way that you've collaborated across the university in support of really driving this program to the point it is today. So if we could, any questions or comments? If not, we'll take a motion.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Great. Trustee Perry has a motion that we approve the compliance program as stated, and it's been seconded by Trustee Woody. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Calhoun. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Keep
you.
up the great work. Now we'll have some informational items from VP Givens. Turn the mic over to you, VP Givens.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The first informational item we have deals with the status of the prior audit findings. I sent a detailed report to you earlier. I hope you had a time to review that. Just in summary, what we have, if we look at, we have 2 findings that have been partially corrected. We have 4 that have been...
Hold on, VP Givens. Should we be advancing the slides? Is there... Thank you.
We have 4 findings that have been uncorrected. One of those has to do with the athletic department, and we have discussed those extensively in various committee meetings. The 3 that relate to the finance and administration, one of those we have validated that the original finding itself has been mostly corrected. And then as part of the validation, we extended the remediation plan to include all university departments rather than just the departments that were cited in the finding. And so what we are proposing that for the second round of remediation that we extend the due date on that to give enough time because it is a rather extensive project, and then we'll remove that from uncorrected and put that in the findings that the due date's not due. Yes, and so that would...
Are you referring to the athletic department?
No, sir, not the athletic department. This is the with Dr. Ford under the finance and administration. That's one of those 3.
Finance and administration. Okay.
And then we have 9 findings where the validation is in process. These findings all relate to the audit that we did last year for the decentralized cash collections process. And as was mentioned in the Budget and Finance Committee, the responsibility for the ticket office has been assigned to the controller's office, and a new process and new procedures are being implemented. We are working with the controller's office and the athletics department to help implement those procedures. We're working in an advisory capacity just to be sure that adequate controls are implemented for that process. And then the last column shows the findings where due date is not due. You'll see most of those are in the athletic department. Those relate to the NCAA investigation, some of the findings that were in their report, and then also to the Rattler Boosters organization. Now, on those, we are monitoring the progress on those, and they are being worked on. And I'll discuss the status of the Rattler Boosters in another information item. Before I move on, are there any questions related to?
Chair Lawson.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Givens, just a quick question. I'm just trying to follow across. So there are 4 that are uncorrected. Could you just elaborate on those 4 a little bit, if I'm reading the chart correctly?
Yeah, those 4, and when we have it in the uncorrected, the corrective action has not been fully implemented by the due date that was given to us when the finding was originally issued. And so one of those, the one that I mentioned, relates to a user access, where it's a project where initially the finding related to certain departments, and that has been corrected. But to correct, we also felt like it was necessary to look at all university departments to get the full correction, and that's what's still in process. There's another finding that relates to the IT risk assessment, when that's in process, and then the other finding related to an accounts payable and some vendor management concern. And if you'd like to see some more detail on that, I'll be glad to provide that.
Okay, no, he just wanted to understand what the 4 were. So, well, thank you. Any other questions or comments on the prior audit findings? I think the big takeaway from this slide is that although there are 4 items that are uncorrected, the one in terms of how the work was originally established, we have completed the actual work as it was related to the original findings, but we've actually expanded the scope of the work in support of the entire university. So hence, it still looks like it's open, but you go back to the original audit, we've actually satisfied. And so what we will do moving forward is extend the deadline as appropriate for the expanded scope of the project, which means many of those will come off of the uncorrected.
And I would just like to point out that there has been some pretty good progress made since the last report. We've had 11 findings that have been corrected. So we whittled down the number of findings considerably from maybe 6 months ago.
Outstanding.
Our next informational item has to do with some of the projects that we have in process. The first one deals with the review of the Rattler Booster financial records as a result of the audit that we did last year related to the boosters, and the audit report that was issued by the external auditor. It was decided that we should review the Rattler Boosters records just to be sure that the records for the June 30, 2018 year are auditable, and that they are implementing the corrective actions that had been recommended in some of the other reports. Our review has disclosed that the Boosters is maintaining records of cash receipts and disbursements, and that those records are auditable. We've the review disclosed that the boosters are depositing money in the foundation account as required by the BOT policy, and that records of the membership records are being maintained. But we did note that the boosters has not, we had some recommendations. One related to the inadequate separation of duties, but the boosters has one employee, so they won't be able to separate duties, but they had not implemented compensating controls related to cash receipts. So we had made some specific recommendations to the boosters for their consideration for that. They also did not have written policies and procedures. And
One second, the VP Gibbons. Chair Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gibbons, so thank you for the work on the booster. But it just hit me that the other DSOs have an external auditor that reviews all of their information, foundation, Are we going to ensure that the boosters have an audit firm that also then goes through their financial records at the appropriate time, such that we could then, as we do NAA and foundation, we get audit results? Are we going to ensure that the boosters have the same process? Oh,
yes, we will.
okay.
And that was really one of the main reasons we wanted to look at the condition of the records for the end of the year, knowing that they will have to have an external audit.
We talk separately about the cost of that, because they're on their way up, and I see their fundraising has kicked in, which is a positive, and I know that's an incremental cost that they'll have to bear, but I think it is something that we don't find ourselves. So as long as you have that on your radar, then comfortable.
Yeah, and we do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned that you provided a record-keeping recommendation. So what are the steps that we have in place, because they may or may not accept a recommendation? So a recommendation is out there, and we're not really sure then what happens after that, so we don't want it to move into the category of a finding. So talk to us about that, moving it from recommendation to knowing what they have implemented.
When we did the review and we came up with the findings, we met with the boosters board, and they have agreed. They submitted a corrective action plan to us that indicated that they accepted the recommendations and would move forward with those. And we have continued to monitor the situation. The boosters, current boosters organization has been very cooperative. They listen, and we're continuing to monitor just to be sure that they get this in place.
Thank you, because I saw a big picture that we were talking about the boosters in this case, but I thought, maybe if we ended up in the realm of talking about another DSO and for whatever reason you provided a recommendation, they didn't accept it, where would that put us? So I'm glad to hear in this case they did accept it and they are implementing.
Great. Proceed, VP Gibbons.
Our next information item relates to the work that we're doing in the athletic department. Because of the issues that have been disclosed related to the various activities of the athletic department, and we have conducted a review of the athletic department in some very specific areas. These pretty much related to issues that had been identified and had come out. And we worked in collaboration with the board chairman as well as Board of Governors staff in coming up with the scope of the review that we have in process. One of the objectives is to determine the reasons and the responsible people for why some of the bills have not been paid on a timely basis. And also to determine why goods and services have been received prior to going through the normal procurement process. We have found where the goods had been received, then purchase orders and requisitions were being issued after the fact. So this made it hard for the athletic department to budget. So we're looking at that to determine the reasons why that could happen and make recommendations for improvement. We're looking at the P-card expenditures to determine that the P-cards were adequately documented, that the P-card statements being reconciled on a timely basis, and if there are deficiencies, whether or not disciplinary actions have been taken pursuant to the university's P-card manual. And then we also look to see at where some of the invoices were provided an adequate basis for pre-audit. There were a number of invoices that were basically round dollar amounts for a stated service, but it didn't provide an adequate detail to really determine whether or not the amount was reasonable by telling us whether or not, or how many people were involved, what dates they worked, how long they worked, and what the rates were. So we are reviewing that to be sure procedures are put in place to provide for an adequate pre-audit of the expenses. And then lastly, we're looking to ensure that the athletic department received current fiscal training. And then that's from the assurance side. We also, as I mentioned, are working in collaboration with the Controller's Office and the athletic department to ensure that adequate procedures over the cash collection process at the ticket office are in place.
VP Gibbons, just on this one item, do you have a timeline for when those items would be complete?
That we have it in process. The expense review should be complete in July, and the advisory service related to the collections should be complete also in July.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just as an informational item, we have included our monthly calls with part of the process, along with Dr. Ford and myself, to make sure that those areas that he addressed as opportunities are reviewed and discussed on our monthly calls with the chairman of the Board of Governors Audit and Finance Committee and Joe Malashevsky. So Rick has been pulled into that process, and I think it's helpful because as we talk about these process improvements and things we want to do better, we need to, on the back end, make sure that they're actually happening. So we've engaged Rick in that process.
Outstanding. No, great.
Our next information item has to do with the project on enterprise risk management. Last fall, the Board of Governors surveyed the state universities to determine the status of enterprise risk management within the state university system, and this continues to be an area of interest for the Board of Governors. But enterprise risk management basically is just looking at the inclusion of all risk from all sources. That would include the financial, operational, strategic, and compliance areas, and just looking at the risk collectively rather than individually. The enterprise risk management program would include such things as risk assessment, risk mitigation, risk financing, monitoring, but in the enterprise risk management would focus on the impact of the university's overall financial and strategic objectives. So we do have a process in place. With the objectives of the project would be to propose a possible approach to implementation of an enterprise risk management, and would cover such things as what should be the program characteristics, what roles and responsibilities, a structure, training, and a timesheet for implementation. And in coming up with the proposals, we look at the best practices for enterprise risk management, also working with other universities to see how they are addressing it, to get ideas on what works and what doesn't work. But typically the university has taken a traditional approach to enterprise risk management in that the risks are being managed, they're being addressed, but it's all being done individually. Just to give you an idea, that like the strategic risk would be governed by the Board of Trustees, the President's Office, and the senior leadership team. Operational risk would be within the various departments like academic affairs, research, university advancement, financial services. Compliance risk would be handled through the General Counsel's Office, audit and compliance, and research, and then finance through financial services section. And this project is in place. We also anticipate completing this sometime towards the end of July, and we'll update you on the results of that report at that time. Our last informational item has to do with the operational audit that's conducted by the Auditor General, who is required to perform an operational audit of the university every 3 years. The current operational audit is in process. It's covering the calendar year 2017 as far as the scope and the activities that the Auditor General is auditing is pretty extensive. It will cover quite a few topics, including the travel of the board members, senior leadership team. It seems to be an area of interest to them. We expect completion of the audit sometime in the fall, and we'll keep you updated as to status on audit as it progresses. And Mr. Chairman, that would conclude my report.
Thank you. Mr. Grable?
You mentioned that board travel. I think we did get some sort of communication on that. At least I did see that come through my email. And you said it was of particular interest. Is that versus past?
As opposed to what they've looked at in the past, that's correct. And it's not just Florida A&M. The Auditor General will develop topics that they look at in all their operational audits. And so this is just an area that they've decided that they want to look at and get more into than they have in the past.
Thank you, VP Givens.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments for VP Givens? Is there any new business? If not, then we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's take 10 minutes and transition to academic and student affairs.